The Night Queen has manipulated all the characters into fighting a giant war. But what does she want? Vengeance? Power? Eternal life? Yeah, probably. In part 2 of this video series, I theorized that every single werewood tree has a green seer physically hooked up to its root system just like the three-eyed raven. If it requires a single green seer to create a single werewood tree, and the odds of being born a green seer are 1 in a million, then werewoods would be extremely rare and sacred, which they are. And if every werewood has a human being hooked up to its root system, the blood from the human would end up going into the tree and make all the sap and the leaves look like blood, because it is blood. Not to mention, if the word werewolf is just Old English for man-wolf, then you can really interpret werewood to be Old English for man-tree. And if every werewood is actually a man-tree, that means there is a green seer, alive, hiding in the lowest level of the crypts of Winterfell, physically hooked up to the root system of the heart tree. By the way, in the books, the three-eyed raven looks totally different. He is described as an albino corpse with the roots of the werewood growing through his entire body. He looks damn good for 125 years old in the TV show. In part 3, I theorized that the ancient Westerosi legends of Brandon the Builder, the Last Hero, and the Night King are actually 3 versions of the same story, and those 3 characters are all the same person. This means that the Night King himself built Winterfell because he is Brandon the Builder. It is heavily implied in the books that the reason for building Winterfell in the first place was to protect the Heart Tree. And since we now know that every werewood actually has a green seer hooked up to its root system, we can infer that the Night King built Winterfell not just to protect some random werewood, but to protect the green seer hooked up to its root system. So why does the Night King care about this particular green seer? Why does he care about this werewood? We don't know much about the Night King, but we do know that he had a queen. So it is a pretty safe bet that the Night King built Winterfell to protect his wife, which makes a lot of sense if his wife was a tree. That is a solid reason to put a shitload of effort into building a castle. And his queen is described in legend as an albino and a corpse, which is exactly the same as the description of the three-eyed raven in the books, giving us another clue that she may have been a green seer. And in part 1, I explained how the mechanics of time travel work in 2 other stories by George R.R. Martin, Unsound Variations and Under Siege. The key takeaway was that it is possible to change the past, and it is not possible to cause a paradox in the process. For example, the time-traveling main character in Under Siege was given a mission to stop the Soviet Union from ever existing in order to prevent the nuclear war that happened between the Soviets and America. Instead, he gave up on his mission and decided to stay in the past and live a happy life in America. As a result of his actions, John Charles Fremont got elected as the first Republican president in 1856. Obviously, in the original timeline, Abraham Lincoln became the first Republican president in 1860. Ironically, the implication is that he fucked up American politics leading up to the Civil War, so the United States ended up not existing instead of the Soviet Union. Irony. Classic George. I also theorized that the true villain in Game of Thrones, the Night Queen, will end up being very similar to the villain in Unsound Variations, the character Bruce Bunnish. Bruce Bunnish was a nefarious time traveler hell-bent on vengeance against his friends from college. He invented a time travel machine that allowed him to go back to any point in his life and take over his own body. He also had a photographic memory which helped a lot. Specifically, it enabled him to build his time machine over and over and over again from memory. And this was necessary because he kept failing at his revenge schemes. For instance, he sabotaged his friend Peter's career as an author, but then Peter became a successful journalist. So Bunnish had to go back in time again, sabotage Peter's career as an author again, and then sabotage his career as a journalist. It is not revealed exactly how many times Bunnish traveled back into the past to retry his revenge scheme, but it is implied to be at least hundreds, if not thousands of attempts. That basically makes Bunish the craziest fucking person of all time. A guy with a photographic memory who's experienced thousands of lifetimes and has the power to potentially solve all the problems in the world, but instead has been 100% laser focused on achieving the perfect revenge on his friends from college. And all they did was make fun of him for losing a chess match. So do we know for sure that someone has been messing with the timeline in Game of Thrones as well? Yes, we do, due to the simple fact that multiple characters, including Jojen and Melisandre, receive visions of the future. Now, Jojen believes that his green dreams cannot be prevented from coming true, but that's ridiculous. If the future cannot be changed, why are characters having visions of the future? Mira herself sees how broken Jojen's logic is and argues vehemently against him. This is the most important conversation of the entire story so far, which is probably why they cut it from the TV show. Sir Rodrik frowned. Well, should it happen that I need to ride against these raiders myself, I shan't take Alebelly then. He didn't see me drowned, did he? No? Good. It heartened Bran to hear that. Maybe they won't drown then, he thought, if they stay away from the sea. Mira thought so too, later that night when she and Jojen met Bran in his room to play a three-sided game of tiles, but her brother shook his head. The things I see in green dreams can't be changed. That made his sister angry. Why would the gods send a warning if we can't heed it and change what's to come? I don't know, Jojen said sadly. If you were Alebelly, you'd probably jump into the well to have done with it. He should fight, and Bran should too. Let's review what happened with Alebelly. Jojen saw the sea come to Winterfell in a green dream, and he saw Mikken, Septon Shale, and Alebelly drowned. And what is the direct consequence of Jojen's green dream? Jojen tells Bran about the green dream, and Bran takes action to change the future, warning Alebelly and the others that they will drown. And Bran did change the future. Because of Bran's warning, Sir Rodrik purposely leaves Alebelly behind at Winterfell. And as a result, Alebelly is one of the men killed when Theon takes the castle. If Jojen had never seen a vision of Alebelly drowning, then he wouldn't have told Bran, and Bran wouldn't have told Rodrik, and Rodrik would have taken Alebelly with him, and Theon would never get the chance to kill Alebelly. The obvious conclusion we should all come to is that Jojen is a fucking moron. He is obviously being manipulated by his green dreams, and he has such strong faith in them that even though he saw a vision of his own death north of the wall, Jojen is still determined to guide Bran north to the Three-Eyed Raven. Jojen is nuts. So someone has definitely been manipulating the characters by sending them visions in order to change the timeline. And like I said, that someone is probably the Night Queen. But what are the limitations of her power exactly? Can she send visions to anyone, or only specific people? It seems that the Night Queen can at least send visions to anyone who has successfully opened their third eye. Here's some info from Jojen. Open your eye. They are open, can't you see? 2 are open, Jojen pointed. 1, 2. I only have 2. You have 3. The crow gave you the third, but you will not open it. He had a slow, soft way of speaking. With 2 eyes, you see my face. With 3, you could see my heart. With 2, you can see that oak tree there. With 3, you could see the acorn the oak grew from and the stump that it will one day become. With 2, you see no farther than your walls. With 3, you would gaze south to the summer sea and north beyond the wall. So we have this concept of the third eye established in the story, and this idea was not invented by the author. It is a concept present in many religions in East Asia, and has been around for thousands of years. The third eye, also called the mind's eye or inner eye, is a mystical and esoteric concept of a speculative, invisible eye which provides perception beyond ordinary sight. The third eye is often associated with religious visions, clairvoyance, the ability to observe chakras and auras, precognition, and out-of-body experiences. People who are claimed to have the capacity to utilize their third eyes are sometimes known as seers. And of course, in Game of Thrones, people who have the capacity to utilize their third eyes are known as green seers. But there is clearly a spectrum for opening your third eye. Some characters like Jojen regularly receive visions through their third eye, but that's about it. While at the other end of the spectrum, we have characters like Bran and the Night Queen herself, who have full-on green seer superpowers like skin changing and time travel. So how exactly does a person open their third eye? It seems to be a combination of 4 factors. First, there is DNA. Some people, particularly those born with red or green eyes, seem to be genetically predisposed to having telepathic abilities. And all the Stark children seem to have the right DNA as well. In the books, all the Stark children have wolf dreams, not just Bran. The second factor, and probably the most important, is serious physical trauma, particularly suffering a near-death experience. There are at least a few characters who seem to be acting based on visions of the future, and they have all been seriously traumatized in their past. Jojen almost died from greywater fever when he was a young boy, and then started having green dreams, eventually leading Bran north. Littlefinger was almost killed in his duel with Brandon Stark, and then became a schemer, eventually starting the War of the Five Kings. Mance Rayder was mauled by a shadow cat and then left the Night's Watch, eventually becoming King Beyond the Wall. The Three-Eyed Raven had his eye stabbed out in a battle and then started to mess with the line of succession, eventually assassinating about a dozen of his own family members to ensure that Aegon the Unlikely would become king. And at the end of his life, he went north of the Wall and found the Children of the Forest to be in a position to provide Greenseer training to Bran. And of course, we know firsthand that Bran has been going through the process of opening his third eye, and he had the worst trauma of them all. He got defenestrated by Jaime. Bran was crippled and spent 3 months in a coma. And while he was in his coma, the Night Queen made Bran have a crazy dream, and she forced him to open his third eye. It took to the air, flapping its wings in his face, slowing him, blinding him. He faltered in the air as its pinions beat against his cheeks. Its beak stabbed at him fiercely, and Bran felt a sudden blinding pain in the middle of his forehead, between his eyes. "What are you doing?" he shrieked. The crow opened its beak and cawed at him, a shrill scream of fear, and the gray mists shuddered and swirled around him and ripped away like a veil. And then Bran woke up, because his third eye was opened, at least a little bit. The implication is that all of these characters had similar dreams sent by the Night Queen while they were in a comatose state. And from that point onward, the Night Queen has the power to influence them through dreams. The third factor is training, which is pretty straightforward. If you want to use your third eye, you gotta practice. The most common method of training is darkness. These new Lorathi were worshippers of Boash, the blind god. Rejecting all other deities, the followers of Boash ate no flesh, drank no wine, and walked barefoot through the world, clad only in hair shirts and hides. Their eunuch priests wore eyeless hoods in honor of their god. Only in darkness, they believed, would their third eye open, allowing them to see the higher truths of creation that lay concealed behind the world's illusions. Those blind priests really hit the nail on the head. Bran spent about 6 weeks hiding from Theon in the crypts of Winterfell. Here, in the chill, damp darkness of the tomb, his third eye had finally opened. He could reach Summer whenever he wanted. Bran spends some time in darkness, and he is quickly able to master control of his connection to his wolf. And later, when he is in the cave with the Three-Eyed Raven, he is again training in darkness. Leaf touched his hand. "The trees will teach you. The trees remember." She raised a hand, and the other singers began to move about the cavern, extinguishing the torches one by one. The darkness thickened and crept toward them. Obviously, in the TV show version of the cave, they are much closer to the surface instead of being like 100 feet underground, and there is so much light that they don't even need torches. I guess it would have been pretty annoying to listen to their dialogue while watching a pitch-black TV screen, but in the books, it is totally dark. Another method of training is to bond with animals. Obviously, all the Stark children had a strong connection to their wolves, and they all had wolf dreams. Their aunt and uncle, Lyanna and Brandon, were extremely fond of riding horses and are described as having been a pair of centaurs. And Daenerys, of course, has her dragons. And there are a lot of other examples in the books and TV show of characters telepathically bonding with their animals. The fourth and final factor is cannibalism. In order to form the strongest possible telepathic connection with a person, you need to consume their blood. This happens in the books with both Daenerys and Bran. Let's look at Bran's experience consuming blood. "It is time," Lord Brynden said. Something in his voice sent icy fingers running up Bran's back. "Time for what? For the next step. For you to go beyond skin changing and learn what it means to be a Greenseer." "The trees will teach him," said Leaf. She beckoned, and another of the singers padded forward, the white-haired one that Mira had named Snowy Locks. She had a weirwood bowl in her hands, carved with a dozen faces, like the ones the heart trees wore. Inside was a white paste, thick and heavy, with dark red veins running through it. "You must eat of this," said Leaf. She handed Bran a wooden spoon. The boy looked at the bowl uncertainly. "What is it?" "A paste of weirwood seeds." Something about the look of it made Bran feel ill. The red veins were only weirwood sap, he supposed, but in the torchlight they looked remarkably like blood. He dipped the spoon into the paste, then hesitated. "Will this make me a greenseer?" "Your blood makes you a greenseer," said Lord Brynden. "This will help awaken your gifts and wed you to the trees." Bran did not want to be married to a tree, but who else would wed a broken boy like him? 1,000 eyes, 100 skins, wisdom deep as the roots of ancient trees. A greenseer. He ate. It had a bitter taste, though not so bitter as acorn paste. The first spoonful was the hardest to get down. He almost retched it right back up. The second tasted better. The third was almost sweet. The rest he spooned up eagerly. Why had he thought that it was bitter? It tasted of honey, of new-fallen snow, of pepper and cinnamon, and the last kiss his mother ever gave him. The empty bowl slipped from his fingers and clattered on the cavern floor. What the fuck just happened? Well, like I said, weirwood sap doesn't just look like blood as Bran thinks. It is blood. Specifically, it is blood from a greenseer. So when Bran consumes the blood, he greatly enhances his telepathic connection to the greenseer, in this case, the three-eyed raven. The first spoonful tasted horrible because it really does taste horrible. But as soon as Bran swallowed the first spoonful, the blood began to take effect, and the remaining spoonfuls tasted like everything Bran has ever tasted, because it is really opening up his mind and his access to his memories. Of course, the weirwoods themselves consume blood. Here's the end of that same chapter when Bran looks back in time through the eyes of the heart tree at Winterfell. Then, as he watched, a bearded man forced a captive down onto his knees before the heart tree. A white-haired woman stepped toward them through a drift of dark red leaves, a bronze sickle in her hand. "No," said Bran. "No, don't!" But they could not hear him, no more than his father had. The woman grabbed the captive by the hair, hooked the sickle round his throat, and slashed. And through the mist of centuries the broken boy could only watch as the man's feet drummed against the earth. But as his life flowed out of him in a red tide, Brandon Stark could taste the blood. So the weirwood trees generally drink blood, and there is a long history of blood sacrifice to the weirwoods. And it may be the case that weirwoods actually require blood sacrifices once in a while to keep the greenseer healthy. Regardless, it is clear in the books that for the children of the forest to be absorbed into the weirwood trees when they die, which is their version of heaven, their blood needs to be absorbed into the tree roots. Just to clarify, bone marrow probably works too. It's really your DNA getting absorbed that matters, not necessarily liquid blood. "Bones," said Bran. "It's bones." The floor of the passage was littered with the bones of birds and beasts, but there were other bones as well, big ones that must have come from giants and small ones that could have been from children. On either side of them, in niches carved from the stone, skulls looked down on them. Bran saw a bear skull and a wolf skull, half a dozen human skulls, and near as many giants. All the rest were small, queerly formed. Children of the forest. The roots had grown in and around and through them, every one. A few had ravens perched atop them, watching them pass with bright black eyes. "Those tree roots aren't absorbing nutrients, they're absorbing souls!" And this brings us back to the crypts of Winterfell. For some reason, House Stark changed their burial practices after the construction of Winterfell. Remember, this is supposedly 2,000 years after the pact between the Children of the Forest and the First Men, when the First Men adopted the same religion as the children. Presumably, at that stage of history, the First Men also wanted their souls to be absorbed into the weirwoods upon death, because that is their version of heaven. But House Stark went the opposite direction. By ancient custom, an iron longsword had been laid across the lap of each who had been Lord of Winterfell to keep the vengeful spirits in their crypts. The oldest had long ago rusted away to nothing, leaving only a few red stains where the metal had rested on stone. Ned wondered if that meant those ghosts were free to roam the castle now. He hoped not. According to ancient Stark custom, rather than letting the souls of the dead Starks go into the werewood, they actively try to prevent this by sealing the bodies in stone crypts and placing longswords on the laps of the statues. The swords are probably just symbolic and don't do anything, so it doesn't make a difference if they have rusted away. What matters is that the bodies are sealed away, where their DNA cannot be absorbed by the heart tree. This change in burial practice implies that some ancient Lord Stark decided to turn against the Night Queen, and he may have purposely collapsed the lowest level of the crypts to seal off the Night Queen, ensuring that she would never be able to manipulate future Lord Starks. Of course, killing her was not an option, because she is the progenitor of House Stark, and that would have made him a kinslayer. Except that it was all a big trick. Remember, the Night Queen is a time traveler. She has the power to change the past over and over again as many times as she wants. So if the Night Queen is sealed off, then she wants to be sealed off. And if all the Lords of Winterfell, as well as Lyanna and Brandon, are entombed in the stone crypts, then the Night Queen has the perfect opportunity to grow the roots of her werewood through the walls of the crypts, breaching every single tomb and absorbing the souls of every Lord Stark, plus Lyanna and Brandon. And this may give the Night Queen the power to influence every single Lord Stark in history through their dreams, which would be super handy for someone trying to change the timeline. And I'm not pulling this idea out of my ass. It is a concept introduced by the author in the story Under Siege. Here is the conversation where the characters discuss their mission to change the timeline and prevent the Soviet Union from ever existing. I sigh and give them what they want, everything in boring detail. When I'm done, I say, Jaegerhorn is the key to the problem. He's got Kronstadt's ear. Antonin don't. Salazar is frowning. If only you could establish rapport with Jaegerhorn, he grumbles. What a futile whiner. He knows that's impossible. You takes what you gets, I tell him. If you're going to wish impossible wishes, why stop at Jaegerhorn? Why not Kronstadt? Hell, why not the goddamn Tsar? He's right, Major, Veronica says. We ought to be grateful that we've got a link with Antonin. At least he's a colonel. That's better than we did in any of the other target periods. Salazar is still unhappy. He's a military historian by trade. He thought this would be easy when they transferred him out from West Point, or what was left of it. Antonin is peripheral, he declares. We must reach the key figures. Your chrononauts are giving me footnotes, bystanders, the wrong men in the wrong place at the wrong time. It is impossible. Salazar has a good point. It's pretty hard to change the course of geopolitics if you can only manipulate random people. If they had the power to manipulate the Tsar of Russia instead of just random people, it would have been easy to complete the mission. And that's why it would be super useful for the Night Queen to be able to manipulate every Lord Stark. So what is the ultimate goal of the Night Queen? Well, as I said earlier, I think she wants vengeance, power, and eternal life. Vengeance on whom? Probably the descendants of the first men, which is pretty much everyone in Westeros. I'm betting the Night Queen is actually a child of the forest. The story presents the children of the forest as being a homogeneous, single-minded group. But that seems pretty unrealistic. Like every other group of people, they probably argue over political issues. When the children of the forest signed the pact, it is likely that not everyone was on board. There was probably a faction of children who were still pro-war, and one of those children became the Night Queen. There is another big hint that the Night Queen may be a child of the forest. Remember, the story of the last hero, aka the Night King, is paralleled with the story of Azor Ahai, aka the Bloodstone Emperor. And the Bloodstone Emperor took a tiger woman for his bride. Considering the fact that the children of the forest are described as having eyes that are slitted like a cat's eyes, it is a pretty safe bet that this tiger woman was actually a child of the forest. But the vengeance is secondary. What she really wants is power, as much power as she can possibly get. And that's what Bran is for. The Night Queen basically wants to train Bran to be the most powerful Greenseer ever and then absorb his power. She doesn't want to be limited to just influencing people through dreams. She wants Bran's power of 100% mental enslavement that he used on Hodor. And she may simply have the ability to absorb his power if and when Bran finally transforms into a werewood and joins the collective godhood of Greenseers. The implication in the books is that the werewoods are all part of a single hive mind. George has written several stories that use this concept. But the true nature of the hive mind is left ambiguous. The children of the forest consider the werewoods to be a form of heaven. When the children die, their souls are absorbed into the trees, and they can live an infinite number of second lives, specifically inside the ravens. We are told in the books that every single raven has the soul of a child of the forest inside it, and that's why Bran saw a few ravens perched on top of skulls. They were perched on their own skulls, is the implication. But that's just the regular children. The green seers themselves are transformed into werewoods and join the hive mind, the collective consciousness known as the old gods. But is this really heaven, or is this actually hell? Because once they get absorbed into the werewood, they are trapped there, whether they like it or not. Is it fun sharing a brain with someone else, or is it a form of torture? Is it like a communist system or a democracy where everyone's thoughts are equally important inside the hive mind? Or is it more like a dictatorship with the most powerful green seer controlling everyone else? Let's take a look at Bran and Summer for some insight. You were gone too long. Bran frowned at him. I wanted to eat. Did you mark the trees? Bran flushed. Jojen was always telling him to do things when he opened his third eye and put on Summer's skin, to claw the bark of a tree, to catch a rabbit and bring it back in his jaws uneaten, to push some rocks in a line. Stupid things. I forgot, he said. You always forget. It was true. He meant to do the things that Jojen asked, but once he was a wolf, they never seemed important. There were always things to see and things to smell, a whole green world to hunt, and he could run. There was nothing better than running. Unless it was running after prey. I was a prince, Jojen, he told the older boy. I was the prince of the woods. You are a prince, Jojen reminded him softly. You remember, don't you? Tell me who you are. You know! Jojen was his friend and his teacher, but sometimes Bran just wanted to hit him. I want you to say the words. Tell me who you are. Bran, he said sullenly. And who is Summer? Jojen prompted. My direwolf. Bran the boy and Summer the wolf. You are two, then. Two. And one. He hated Jojen when he got stupid like this. At Winterfell, he wanted me to dream my wolf dreams, and now that I know how, he's always calling me back. Remember that, Bran. Remember yourself, or the wolf will consume you. When you join, it is not enough to run and hunt and howl in Summer's skin. I know I never marked the tree, but I will the next time. My third eye is open like you wanted. So wide open that I fear you may fall through it, and live all the rest of your days as a wolf of the woods. I won't, I promise. The boy promises. Will the wolf remember? You run with Summer, you hunt with him, kill with him, but you bend to his will more than him to yours. I just forget, Bran complained. So basically, Bran really sucks at controlling Summer. As Jojen pointed out, Bran bends to Summer's will more than Summer bends to Bran's. Now let's contrast that to Bran's control over Hodor. One day, Mira and Jojen decided to go see the river, despite Leaf's cautions. I want to come too, Bran said. Mira gave him a mournful look. The river was 600 feet below, down steep slopes and twisty passages, she explained, and the last part required climbing down a rope. Hodor could never make the climb with you on his back. I'm sorry, Bran. Bran remembered a time when no one could climb as good as him, not even Robb or Jon. Part of him wanted to shout at them for leaving him, and another part wanted to cry. He was almost a man grown, though, so he said nothing. But after they were gone, he slipped inside Hodor's skin and followed them. The big stable boy no longer fought him as he had the first time, back in the lake tower during the storm. Like a dog who has had all the fight whipped out of him, Hodor would curl up and hide whenever Bran reached out for him. His hiding place was somewhere deep within him, a pit where not even Bran could touch him. No one wants to hurt you, Hodor, he said silently to the child man whose flesh he'd taken. I just want to be strong again for a while. I'll give it back, the way I always do. Jesus fucking Christ, that is the most evil bullshit we have seen in the story so far, not counting Ramsay. It's one thing to skin change Hodor in an emergency when you're all about to die, but Bran keeps doing it in non-emergency situations. He was angry about being left out of an adventure, so he mentally enslaved a person for a couple hours to make himself feel better. Dick move, Bran. More importantly, Bran clearly has much more control over Hodor than he does over Summer. Summer has a strong mental will. He is a wolf after all. Hodor has a weak mental will because he is simple-minded. So in the case of the hive mind of the werewoods, aka the old gods, It seems that the Night Queen is much more powerful than the rest of the Greenseers. She has been using them as her slaves, bending them all to her will. And when a new Greenseer joins the hive mind, she gains their memories and their powers. And that's why Bran is so important. As far as we know, Bran is the only Greenseer who has demonstrated the power to mentally enslave another person, even if that particular person was simple-minded. Hodor may have just been training wheels to be able to mentally enslave regular people. We see another character attempt this in the books out of desperation, and it goes very badly. Now, he thought, do it now or die. He summoned all the strength still in him, leapt out of his own skin, and forced himself inside her. Thistle arched her back and screamed, "Abomination!" Was that her, or him, or Hagen? He never knew. His old flesh fell back into the snowdrift as her fingers loosened. The spearwife twisted violently, shrieking. His shadow cat used to fight him wildly, and the snow bear had gone half mad for a time, snapping at trees and rocks and empty air, but this was worse. "Get out! Get out!" He heard her own mouth shouting. Her body staggered, fell, and rose again. Her hands flailed, her legs jerked this way and that in some grotesque dance as his spirit and her own fought for the flesh. She sucked down a mouthful of the frigid air, and Varmir had half a heartbeat to glory in the taste of it and the strength of this young body before her teeth snapped together and filled his mouth with blood. She raised her hands to his face. He tried to push them down again, but the hands would not obey, and she was clawing at his eyes. Abomination, he remembered, drowning in blood and pain and madness. When he tried to scream, she spat their tongue out. That's what normally happens if you try to skin change a human. And we can see that there is a spectrum with skin changing various different animals. Birds, wolves, and dogs are the easiest to skin change. Apparently shadow cats are harder and bears are even more difficult. And humans are virtually impossible. Okay, so let's assume that part of the theory is correct. The Night Queen wants the power to enslave people instead of being limited to just sending them fucked up dreams. And absorbing Bran into the werewoods will enable her to do this, or so she hopes. Well then, what is the point of the rest of the story? What purpose will the other main characters serve? Specifically, how are Jon and Daenerys going to come into play? What is the Night Queen planning to do with them? And if the Night Queen has the power to go back in time and fix mistakes, why is her master plan taking so long? She's been fucking around for 8,000 years. What has she been doing this whole time? Well, like I said, the first factor that dictates whether or not a person can open their third eye is their DNA. Some people are genetically predisposed to having their third eye open. So basically, for the final stage of the plan, the Night Queen needed a few people in the right places with the right DNA. Primarily Bran, Jon, and Daenerys. Obviously, going into Season 8, Jon and Daenerys are about to lead humanity in the war against the White Walkers. And if they win, they would probably end up becoming the new king and queen of the Seven Kingdoms. And at that point in time, when Jon and Daenerys possess absolute power over the human race by being the only dragon riders left in the world, the Night Queen will use Bran's powers to enslave them. And she would presumably be able to enslave any future children they have, because the children would have the same special DNA predisposing them to mental enslavement. And then she would make sure the dynasty practices strict incest like the Targaryens used to do, which would ensure that she can enslave the descendants of Jon and Daenerys for the rest of time, giving the Night Queen absolute power over the human race for all eternity. And that would be a huge step up from her current ability to influence every Lord Stark through dreams. So that's why the plan took so long. The Night Queen is literally breeding the people she needs, and it takes hundreds of generations to do that. By contrast, creating the White Walkers was much faster because she actually altered their DNA directly instead of breeding them. And that's why the mystery of Jon's parents is such a big deal. It's not about Jon being the rightful heir to the Iron Throne, which is probably going to get blown up before the end of the story anyways, and it's not just about him riding a dragon. It is more important to the plan that Jon is primed and ready for mental enslavement. In fact, that may be the underlying reason why Jon had to die and get resurrected. If a near-death experience opens your third eye a little bit, an actual death experience should open it even further. And that, ladies and gents, is the Night Queen's master plan. Step 1. cause the Long Night and create the White Walkers and the Night King in Westeros, while creating the Dragon Riders and Azor Ahai in Essos. Plummet the world into chaos and war for a generation, and then after the Long Night ends, create a prophecy that says Azor Ahai will be reborn one day to fight the forces of darkness again. Step 2. Make sure Bran, Jon, and Daenerys are born with the right DNA, and make sure the geopolitical situation of Westeros is in the right state. Step 3. Turn Bran into a powerful Greenseer, make Daenerys hatch dragons, and use the Azor Ahai legend to prop up Jon and Daenerys, who will then lead humanity to victory in a war against the White Walkers. Step 4. Absorb Bran into the weirwood hive mind, use his powers to enslave Jon and Daenerys, and establish a new dynasty of dragon riders who have absolute power over the human race. This also answers the question, who is Azor Ahai reborn? The real answer is nobody. The prophecy is bullshit. It is a self-fulfilling prophecy created by the Night Queen. The Azor Ahai prophecy is much more important in the books. Here is the scene Tyrion witnesses in Volantis. "Do you understand what he is saying?" he asked Halden in the common tongue. "I would if I did not have a dwarf piping in my ear." "I do not pipe." Tyrion crossed his arms and looked behind him, studying the faces of the men and women who had stopped to listen. Everywhere he turned, he saw tattoos. Slaves. 4 of every 5 of them are slaves. "The priest is calling on the Volantines to go to war," the half-maester told him, "but on the side of right, as soldiers of the Lord of Light, R'hllor, who made the sun and stars and fights eternally against the darkness. Niessos and Malakwo have turned away from the light," he says, "their hearts darkened by the yellow harpies from the east." He says, dragons. I understood that word. He said dragons. Aye, the dragons have come to carry her to glory. Her. Daenerys? Halden nodded. Bonero has sent forth the word from Volantis. Her coming is the fulfillment of an ancient prophecy. From smoke and salt was she born to make the world anew. She is Azor Ahai returned, and her triumph over darkness will bring a summer that will never end. Death itself will bend its knee, and all those who die fighting in her cause shall be reborn. "Do I have to be reborn in this same body?" asked Tyrion. This scene also directly connects the Azor Ahai prophecy to the bigger theme of slavery. Slavery is obviously one of the major themes of the story, with Daenerys being the breaker of chains. And in the books, it seems likely that the slaves of Volantis will rise up, break their chains, and go to war fighting for Daenerys. Thematically, it would make a lot of sense if Jon the Peacemaker and Daenerys the Breaker of Chains team up and defeat the pro-war, pro-slavery Night Queen. So assuming that Game of Thrones is going to have a bittersweet ending, as George has told us, and not one that is tragic for all the characters as the Night Queen would do, how is the Night Queen going to be defeated? And how is it even possible to defeat a time traveler? If the Night Queen is about to die, she can just hit pause, go back in time, and try again. Well, I think she will be defeated by Bran. The Night Queen has only one vulnerability, and that is losing control of the hive mind to a Greenseer more powerful than she is. Her own lust for power will ironically end up being her undoing. She could have stayed content with her power to influence the Lords of Winterfell through dreams. Instead, she wanted to enslave the human race, and created Bran, the most powerful Greenseer in history. Powerful enough to skin change a human. More powerful than the Night Queen. So even though Bran is terrible at bending Summer to his will in the beginning of the story, he will successfully bend the Night Queen to his will and do something totally different from what she wants. Specifically, in that first moment when Bran joins the hive mind and they fight for control, I think the Night Queen will try to take over Jon's body, but Bran will instead go back in time and merge his consciousness with the Night King, aka Brandon the Builder. So yes, Bran is the Night King. But wait, if Bran is the Night King, then why is the Night King acting all evil and shit? Well, let's take another look at the time traveler Bruce Bunnish from Unsound Variations. Bunnish went back in time hundreds or maybe thousands of times trying to craft the perfect revenge scheme against his friends from college because they made fun of him for losing an important chess game in a tournament that they all thought was a winnable game. Bunnish blew it, Peter said sourly. There was a critical position. Bunnish had a sacrifice, you know? A double-piece sack. Very sharp, but it would have busted up Veselaire's king side and driven his king out into the open. But Bunish was too timid for that. Instead, he kept looking at Veselaire's queenside attack, and finally he made some feeble defensive move. Veselaire shifted another piece to the queenside, and Bunish defended again. Instead of following up his advantage, he made a whole series of cautious little adjustments to the position, and before long his attack had dissipated. After that, of course, Veselaire overwhelmed him. Afterwards, even Veselaire admitted that he was busted if Brucey had played knight takes pawn at the critical point. Damn! And here is Bunish at the end of the story. When I flashed back, you have no idea how many times I have flashed back. Trying one new idea after another. That is always my target point. That day in Evanston, the game with Veselaire. I've tried every move there is to be tried in that position, every wild idea. It makes no difference. Veselaire always beats me. All the variations are unsound. Bunish is so insane that he always goes back to the critical point in the game and tries to win. Of course, if he wanted to, he could go back to the beginning of the chess game and make totally different moves from the start, but instead he always goes back to the critical point. Now let's apply that concept of a chess game with a critical point to Game of Thrones and the Night Queen. Bran is metaphorically playing a game of chess against the Night Queen. Unlike Bruce Bunish, Bran does not have the option of making different moves from the start. Bran actually needs to ensure that the game does reach the critical point, which will be the moment when he wrests control of the hive mind away from the Night Queen. So that means even though Bran will travel back in time 8,000 years and merge with the Night King, at that point he needs to replay all the same moves in the chess game to reach the critical point again 8,000 years later. Bran needs to first ensure that he takes control of the hive mind in order to defeat the Night Queen. And then after that, Bran as the Night King can finally make peace with humans. Now you might be asking, why would Bran bother going back in time at all if he can't change anything? Why wouldn't he just take over the Night King? I don't think he will have a choice. It will either be an accident, or it may be impossible for Bran to merge with the Night King after he is transformed into a White Walker. So Bran would have to merge with him 8,000 years ago while he was still a regular human. And it may be the case that Bran won't go back in time, and he will just take over the Night King in present day. But there are a lot of hints that Bran is the Night King and has been the Night King for the whole story. So how is this going to play out exactly? The climax of the whole story may involve Bran and some of his siblings down in the crypts of Winterfell, where dragons are not useful, about to be killed by a horde of zombies and White Walkers. And there will probably be a physical obstacle in their way, like a pile of rubble or something, to make it extra suspenseful for TV, because the TV show uses fast zombies instead of slow zombies like they were supposed to. Facing imminent death, Bran will finally sacrifice himself and transform into a werewood. Then the Night King and the zombies will break through the wall, but instead of killing Jon, the Night King will be like, "Hey Jon, I'm Bran. Let's make peace, dude." And that's my prediction for how the story will end. It's probably wrong, and even if I'm right and the books do end this way, they are certainly going to cut out a lot of those details for the TV show. Although they have said for years that the ending of the show would be roughly the same as the books. In my next video, I will go over all my other crazy predictions for Season 8.